name is Leroy Blevins. Welcome to Mysteries and Histories. In this episode here, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the flood of Noah, but more or less on answering some questions. Because one big question that people has talked about over the years were like, if there was this great flood and there was this man named Noah, he had all these animals and stuff on the ark, how did he get these certain animals to these different locations? That's all over the earth. Well, what people don't understand is the Bible does give us some insight on what actually the earth looked like back then and the way the earth looks like today when it came to the way we see it today. But you have to piece all this together. So that's why we find answers when we start doing research. We start piecing all this information together, just like the way the earth is, and finding questions to a certain, finding questions and then coming up with that answer, I should say. Like, how did Noah get all the animals to different locations all over the earth? Well, people don't know is actually in the time of Noah, there was actually 12 arks made in the time of Noah. But I'll make another video on that and explain and show you exactly images of the other arks that I found. And we'll go into stories that was told about the flood. But in this one here, I want to show everyone how did animals get to their locations. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start right here. As you see in, this is from Genesis, chapter 1, verse 2. And the earth was without form and void. So basically the earth was, back then, in the beginning, it was just like a stream of water. Then God formed the water, which he made it into a complete circle. Then in verse 9, and God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. So basically now, all the water was in one location, and then the land was formed, and that was all in one location. So basically back then in the beginning, there was no country separating or anything else. It was one big land mass with the water mass in one location itself. Verse 10, and God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together, again they point out, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas, and God saw it was good. So it pointed out again that the gathering of the waters is basically the waters was in one location and the landmass was in one location. So now, as we go on, we start reading this, and this is from the beginning. Then we start reading more, and then we get the story of Noah and stuff, and then we'll come into the story after Noah, which I'm going to pull up this right here. Now, what I'm going to point out here is a part of the Bible where it tells us when the earth was starting to be formed and became the way we see it today. Genesis chapter 10, verse 25. And unto Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. So now we know that in the days of Peleg, the earth starts separating and divided from one another and start forming countries. So now we know when we base this and we go back to the time frame and the timelines, and as we see here, the days of Peleg was 239 years. That's how long he lived. Okay, and we see he was born 101 years after the flood. By the time frame, we can find out that in the days of Peleg was born 101 years after the flood. As you see here, Noah lived to be 950 years old. Then we go on to Shem, how old he was, how long he lived, and so forth and so forth. This is how old Noah was when each one of these people was born. And as you see here, in 701 years of Noah's age, Peleg was born. So now we know exactly from 101 years from the time of Noah's flood to the time of Peleg's days is when basically Earth was still together. So now we can put all this together, and this is how we see it. Timelines from beginning to the time of the flood and to the days of Peleg. And we base this on this right here. Okay, so the total time from the beginning to the time of the days of Peleg, 1,762 years that the earth was one complete landmass, basically. That's all it was, one big landmass for 1,762 years in the beginning. And then in the days of Peleg, which took 239 years for the earth to separate from one another, from the dry lands to separate from one another, become and form countries. This is why today, just like in the story of Noah, they said the ark landed in the mountains of Ararat. Well, actually, Noah's ark actually landed on high hills next to Mount Ararat, because in Noah's time, mountaintops was only like 15 cubics or 45 feet higher than the high hills. So basically, this is what it looked like back then. The high hills is only 15 cubics or 45 feet. I mean, the mountaintops that's how high the mountaintops were in Noah's time from the high hills. Then when Noah's ark landed in the 10th month, okay, the ark was really almost leveled with a mountaintop. Then when the earth was starting to be divided in the days of Peleg, which took 239 years, as the earth was breaking apart from one another, landmass was breaking apart from one another, that's when we have these shifts and the land start forming like stairwells. That's why if you look at Grand Canyon and all these other locations, you'll see it looks like a staircase going up the side of the mountain sides, and then even in the canyons you see it looks like stairs going up. Is because when the earth was being divided and the earth was shifting, everything started rising. That's why if you see like Mount Everest, you know, that's why it's the highest mountain in the world now, because back then it was only 15 cubics, which is 45 feet higher than a high hill. And basically the high hills back in Noah's time, like Mount Ararat, okay, you had your mountaintops, but there was only 45 feet from high hills. And then as the land was shifting and the land was growing high, that part of that hillside actually became part of the mountain. So that's why when we look for answers, the Bible does gives us answers. It's just we have to know where to look at, and we have to keep on reading, keep on reading. I went through the Bible like a dozen times or so from the beginning to the end, each book, because I do a lot of research on them. But in the Bible, if we take the information of what is written and base everything on what is written, not what we're told. Now, there's a lot of people says, you know, we're told this story, we're told this story. But when you read the Bible, it tells you a different story than what we are told. Just like here, we can find out how the earth looked like in the beginning, but when was it divided? But then as we read on further, as we go past the flood, we can see when the days of the earth, because it specifies the name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. So now we know that in his days, that's when the earth started separating. Then we go back to the time frame and the timelines that I made from the time of the beginning, or from the time of Noah to the time of Abraham. We'll find out that when Noah was 701 years old, Peleg was born. And then we can find out more information when we come down to the Peleg, when how long he lived was 239 years. So now we know that from the flood to the days of Peleg was 101 years. We also know that it took 239 years for the earth to separate. Because remember, the flood came about because God said, be fruitful, multiply the earth, which is basically, if you watch the beginning and you read the stories, they're always staying in one location. Like if you I'll pull up this one right here. Okay, they were staying like in one location. If you watch my cursor, they were staying in one location. He said, be fruitful and multiply the whole earth, which is basically all the land. But as you read the stories, they all stayed in the same location, just like the Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel also took place. This is before Tower of Babel took place before Pegleg's days. We see in the Bible when we read that all the people is in this one location. And then the gods came down and they clapped their hand and everybody started speaking different languages. That's when they started separating because certain people that spoke this language went to this part of the earth. Certain parts of people that spoke this kind of language went to this part of the earth, you know. And they start separating that way and they took their animals with them. Then when people got to their locations, and then we had the beginning of the days of Peleg, and then when people got to their locations and the language they spoke, that's when the earth started dividing. So it keeps people in their locations and separated from one another so they could be multiplying the whole earth, because if they kept it in one spot and they all kept the same language, they would never multiply it around the earth. But God wanted the whole earth. That's why the flood came about, because He wanted them to separate and multiply through the whole earth, but they didn't do it. But I hope this makes you understand a little bit on the Bible does gives us answers to the questions. It's just it takes time. You have to go through it and then read them and then make notes. Like if you're hunting for a specific, if there's a specific question that you have, just like this part about Noah and the flood, how did all the animals reach their location? You start in the beginning and you work your way through until you get to the time of Abraham, because in between there you're going to find out from the beginning to the time of Abraham. The Bible does tell us this, of when the earth was separated, and that was in the days of Peleg. Then by going on time frames, we can see that the days of Peleg was 101 years after the flood. And it took 239 years for the earth to divide and became the way we see it today. And as everybody knows, when a landmass starts shifting and they start forming, they're going to start building, they're going to start crumbling underneath it like this and start forming like steps. So this gives us answers to a lot of things that people just don't understand. They think these steps and stuff was made from when the time of the flood occurred and stuff, because again, when they base their research, they're based on what we see today, but they're not taking consideration on actually what the earth looked like back then. So I hope this answers some of the questions that people been asking over the years about the story of Noah. And I'll be making more videos here soon. So thank you and have a pleasant day.